Okay, it's 11 o'clock on my clock, and so it's time for us to get started this morning. I want to welcome everybody to our webinar today, and we're going to be talking about building our brains, keeping our brains active over the summer. I'm Betsy Hill, president of BrainWare Learning, and I'm delighted to welcome everybody here today. Couple housekeeping things while people are still joining us and while we're getting started. One thing is that the handouts are available. If you just go to the right of the chat tab, there's a handouts tab, and you can download a copy of the slides that we'll be using today, as well as some other documents that we'll be talking about. Everybody is just in listen mode, but we want to hear your questions if you have them. So please go ahead and type them in the chat window. So I'm typing in the chat window so everybody can see where that is. We are recording today's webinar, and you will get a link to it afterwards, as will everybody who registered. I know that there are a lot of people who registered for the webinar today knowing that they weren't going to be available at this specific time, but who wanted to be able to see it later. So they will have that option. Great. And if you're listening to this and you have questions, feel free to email us at the end. I will give you a link or give you information on how to contact us. So here is our plan for the day. We are going to start off with a little bit of discussion of cognitive skills and how they relate to academics and life. And we'll give a few examples and talk about how we use those processes in reading and math. We'll talk about assessing cognitive skills and focus on a couple of options that people often use before and after using BrainWare SAFARI to evaluate the impact of using the program. After that, we'll get into some specific best practices for using BrainWare SAFARI with your child at home this summer. And then, as if that weren't enough, right? We'll get into some activities that you can build around the things that you are probably already doing this summer that are good brain building, keeping our brains active, but without it being more like school. So what I wanted to do next is just get a little bit of information about our audience today. So I have a little poll, and I'm going to launch that. If you'll just give us a little bit of an idea about the ages of the children that you either are a parent of or that you work with, that would be great. Are they elementary, middle school, high school, or college or older? And that will be helpful in it as we talk about things this afternoon. Hopefully everybody can see it. I'm not seeing any responses, so. Oh, there are some. Okay, well, it looks like we pretty much covered just about all of the ages. So elementary, middle school, high school. Okay, well, we've got something for everybody then. So that's good. I'm going to close that. And we will move a little along again. Okay, so this is a slide that we use to talk about cognitive skills. And if you've attended webinars before, you may have seen some of this. But I think it's always really helpful to talk about exactly what they are and why they're important and how they fit in with things that we typically think of as, the basics like reading and math. So this is a chart. If we start at the very top, we see things like academic performance, workplace performance, health outcomes. All of those things are the things that we want for our children to grow up and do well at. We want them to get as far as they can in terms of education and as far as they want to. We want them to have a good job that they find rewarding and that supports them and their families. We want them to be healthy. And of course, we want them to, in terms of legal and safety, stay out of jail and do the right things in life. And then under that are where schools typically focus, reading and writing and technology and the other things that rely on those. But underneath all those things, the things that we don't always think about or pay attention to in school are a variety of cognitive processes, the processes that our brains use to store, retrieve, take in, remember, retrieve, organize and make sense of the information in the world around us. And it starts, and I'm going to jump down to the very bottom. In that bottom box on this slide, you see foundational cognitive skills. These are things like attention, visual processing, processing speed, auditory processing, the basic ways that information gets into our brains from the outside world. And if those are happening efficiently and accurately, that is great. But if they're not, of course, that may slow us down. Actually, if we think about the fact that that is where the learning process actually starts, it's going to be an issue. If the information doesn't get past our attention filters or gets jumbled up, gets out of sequence as it comes into our brains, of course, we're going to have issues at the very start of the learning process. Up on top of that, the next box up, where it's labeled core executive functions. Executive functions are also cognitive skills, but they're a special class of cognitive skills. These are the directive capacities of our mind. They're the way that we direct our mind and are proactive, rather than everything at the very bottom happens pretty much at a non-conscious automatic level. At the next tier up, we're now more consciously directing and thinking about and conscious of what is going on. So there are three core executive functions: working memory, inhibitory control, and cognitive flexibility. Now I'll talk just a little bit about each of those. So working memory is our ability to hold information in our mind while we think about it. So for example, everyday examples would include if you ask your child to go upstairs and get your backpack and your soccer uniform, and oh, by the way, don't forget your spelling list so that we can go over your spelling words in the car when we drive to school or to the soccer game or wherever you're going. So holding that information and remembering it and sort of being able to check it off piece by piece as they do it, of course, is something that many children struggle with. In fact, many adults sometimes get through one or two things and have then forgotten what that third one was going to be. So that's working memory. Inhibitory control is pretty much what it sounds like. It's your ability to inhibit or to stop some reaction that you would normally have. So if you get mad at somebody and you want to punch them in the nose, inhibitory control keeps you from doing that. But it's also not just in the instant of being angry. If you think about it, it's your ability to defer gratification over time, not to give in to the temptations to play your video game or to watch TV when homework is supposed to be being done, and that kind of thing. It's also, then the third, we want to get to the third executive function, which is cognitive flexibility. And that refers to our ability to shift our mindset when the world around us changes or when we encounter a stumbling block or an obstacle. So many times you've probably been in this kind of situation where you're in a circumstance and you have a problem that you're confronted with, and you try the usual kinds of solutions that you might use, but they don't work. So cognitive flexibility is that capacity that allows you to shift around and to say to yourself, now what else could I try? How else could I approach this problem? And to be able to develop new ways to try them out and to learn from that process. And then on top of that are a group of executive functions, also cognitive skills, that are referred to as higher order thinking. Sometimes these are referred to as 21st century skills or soft skills. And the fact of the matter is that whether they're hard or soft, and whether they're 21st century or 22nd century or any other century, these are skills that are very, very important today in school and in the workplace and in life in general. Things like critical thinking, collaboration, communication, creativity, reasoning skills, all that kind of thing. And what we're showing on this chart is that these are all underneath reading and math and technology. So they're not just nice to have along the side or important for other reasons. In addition to the kinds of things I've been talking about, they're also part and parcel of, they're just absolutely integral to the process of learning to read and the process of learning to do math. So just to spend a little time on each of those, when I talk to most educators and elementary school teachers, we talk about the basics of reading or the basics of something they're going to be teaching. And usually when it comes to reading, the basics are often defined in reading as decoding and fluency and comprehension. So decoding is sounding out words, fluency is building up your ability to read fluently and with expression, and then comprehension, of course, is understanding what you're reading. And these don't all go together, as teachers and parents know, and they're also not the most basic, even decoding. Now, it seems like a basic of reading, but there actually is no decoding part of our brain. In order to decode, our brains have to be doing a bunch of different things all at the same time. So, for example, if I can't sustain my attention as I'm in decoding a word and my mind wanders off halfway through the word, that's obviously I'm going to have to start back over again, and I'm going to have trouble deciphering what that word is. Visual discrimination, quickly in thousandths of a second, discriminating between a B and a P or an M and an N. Processing speed, sequential processing, keeping the letters or the words in the right order as I take them in. Fluency, things like visual span, which is how much information I can take in at a glance, or my flexible attention and my processing speed are going to have an impact there. Without them, good skills in that area, it's going to be hard to build up that kind of fluency that we want to see in our readers. And then finally, comprehension is where, of course, the rubber really meets the road in reading. And I hear from many teachers and many parents that their kids can read beautifully out loud, but they read a passage or they read a story or they read whatever it is, and they really have no idea what it was about, or they can't really explain it. They don't have any kind of deep understanding of it. And so in order to do that, we need to have skills like good working memory, good visualization skills, and that kind of thing. So here's a little example. This is the beginning of one of my favorite childhood books, Mary Poppins, and it starts off this way. If you want to find Cherry Tree Lane, all you have to do is to ask the policeman at the crossroads. He will push his helmet slightly to one side, scratch his head thoughtfully, and then he will point his huge white-gloved finger and say, first to your right, second to your left, sharp right again, and you're there. Good morning. So, can you close your mind and have an image of how to get to Cherry Tree Lane? Can you imagine what it looks like, what that policeman looks like with his white-gloved finger and pushing his helmet to one side? Your ability to visualize this is really inherent, and the ability to hold that information in your mind is inherent in actually comprehending it. So if you can hold those directions in your mind, and then later, as you get there, decide whether that last turn is right or left at the cross street, that really is telling as to whether or not you were able to understand and retain that information. And that's very much related to your ability to hold that information in your mind and working memory and your ability to visualize it. The same principles apply in math. In math, we have to use things like our visual spatial understanding, being able to see where things are in space in relationship to each other, where they are in time relative to each other sometimes, being able to visualize what things look at when we move them around. So think about geometry, think about the ability to extract information from charts or graphs. So in all of the STEM fields, in fact. So STEM, as probably most of you know, stands for science, technology, engineering, and math. And in all of those fields, visual spatial skills are very important. In fact, somebody told me the other day that the reason that the people who drop out of engineering programs in the first year, the reason that they do is because they have not been successful in a visual spatial course. And so building up these skills can be very, very important. Math, of course, starts with some very basic things. We think about counting as one of those skills that students or that children develop pretty early on when they're still toddlers, many of them. And there's a lot of research that's been done that shows that visual spatial skills are actually highly connected to counting and your ability to keep things in a sequence. So I think of my 4.5-year-old granddaughter who now counts quite well. But long before she could actually count things, she could recite the numbers up to 100. I don't think she really knew what they were, but initially. But then she starts, now she can count a group of things, a bunch of buttons on a table or whatever it might be, or ladybugs in the book. And you can see her mind. She's 4.5. She was doing this when she was about 4, I think. So keeping track of which ones she's counted and which ones she hasn't. And so you think of that as working memory, keeping track of where you are in the steps in the process. And then ultimately math is very logical. And so our ability to reason, to problem solve, is also a really critical part of math. And just to give one example here of that first one of the visual spatial, this is the kind of problem that we get a lot on standardized tests. And actually in real life, it turns out that understanding these rotations are very important. And maybe you should give this test to the next contractor you hire before you let them work on your house. I know I have a couple that I should have given this problem to before I hired them. At any rate, so if you take a look at the shape, the L sort of lying down on the left-hand side, and you were asked now which of the ones on the right, A, B, C, represents a 90-degree counterclockwise rotation of the shape on the left. And you don't need to tell me your answer. You don't need to type it in the chat window, though you're certainly welcome to if you want to. But if you said figure A, you were right. Figure B is a clockwise rotation rather than a counterclockwise rotation. And figure C is a 180-degree rotation. So it doesn't matter, actually, whether it's left or right. Now, all these skills that we've been talking about are things that, as we have suggested, are very important in terms of reading and math and everything else that we do in school and, frankly, in life. And we tend to think about these as things that we're either good at or not. Some people are, just seem to have great visual spatial skills. Other people have great memory for language. But the fact of the matter is that all of these underlying cognitive processes can be strengthened. And that's actually what BrainWare is all about. So for those of you who already know that, that's great. And make sure that as you have questions as we go along, please feel free to type them into the chat window. I'll try to address them as we go along, or certainly at the end. So I want next to talk about a couple of cognitive ways of assessing cognitive skills that people typically will use before and after cognitive training with BrainWare SAFARI or for other reasons, just to make sure that people are aware of them. So one is something called our BrainWare cognitive rating scales. This is not a normed scientific assessment, but it will help give you a feeling for where your child is starting in terms of their cognitive strengths and relative areas of strength and weakness. And the nice thing about the cognitive rating scales is that there is no cost to use that tool. If you follow that link that's at the bottom right, it will take you to a page which has a lot of information on getting started and using BrainWare SAFARI, including a link to those rating scales so that you can do those before and after your child uses BrainWare SAFARI. What it looks like basically is the kind of survey or quiz that you may have taken online for a variety of reasons. And basically, there are about 30 statements that ask you to compare your child to others the same age and gender. And you're going to rate them from significantly below average to significantly above average, with average being right in the middle. And all of these statements are behaviors that are readily observable by a parent. You might have both parents do this, or you might have a babysitter if they are familiar with the child, or even a teacher if you have access and they're willing to do that. So a variety of different ways, but it'll certainly give you a perspective. And then what you'll see as you complete it is you'll receive an email with a chart like the one on the left, top left there, and it will have a score, a number of points in each processing area. So you have a score for attention, for perceptual processing, thinking skills, et cetera, et cetera. And then there's also a chart that you can use to see what sort of those results sort of mean. So, for example, in this case, the lowest ranking for this child was in sensory motor skills, where his overall score was 11. And 11 is in the range of below average. And his highest was a score for thinking skills of 27, and that falls in the high degree of skill. So this is a child who is a wonderful thinker, but probably pretty clumsy. And I can tell you that is true because I channeled my memories of one of my children. I'll just say one of my children from when they were young when I created this. But you'll see very similar things, and you get a sense for strengths and weaknesses. The other option that is now available is called the MindPrint Cognitive Assessment. This is a scientifically valid, nationally normed assessment administered online. It takes about an hour. It's much more specific in terms of being an assessment and, of course, very measuring skills related to national norms. And it comes with a 10 or 12 page detailed report that's written to be understood by parents. And it ties to a personalized learning plan with a lot of wonderful resources and strategies that address an individual child's learning profile. So the cost for this assessment is $199 for this report. And if you want to add on the second assessment, the post-assessment, and the analysis of your child's growth, that's another $50. We do have a summer sale going on right now, which will take 20% off your purchase. So if you're interested in that, your timing is good. And to do that, you just need to use the code SUMMER20, SUMMER 20, on our website for any purchase. That will give you 20% off. And hopefully Karen or somebody will remind me to say that again before we finish up. Okay. All right. So now that you have a perspective on how important our cognitive skills are, we want to take a little deeper look at BrainWare SAFARI. It's a cognitive training program, of course, that many of you are planning to use with your children this summer. These are some of the ways that it is different from other cognitive programs that you may have come across. It comes from clinical therapy, actually about 4 or 5 decades of clinicians, multiple disciplines, working together to craft a set of exercises that were very effective, but they were also very expensive. And so, Karen, thanks so much for adding that. And so what we did is incorporate them with video game technology so that it could be much more affordable and much more accessible for many more children. We recommend it for ages 6 to 106. That probably is pretty much what you guys are thinking about, hopefully. And just want to talk a little bit about using BrainWare in the summer. You've been reading a lot these days about the average that's called sometimes the summer slide. I like to call it summer brain drain. But in any event, children typically lose ground over the summer rather than continuing to develop in terms of their academic skills over the summer. In fact, the average that I've read is 2 to 2.5, maybe even a little bit more months of learning. And if you think about that, you're in school for about 9 months, that's a pretty big chunk of learning that just evaporates over the summer. In one of our original studies, we did have a group that used BrainWare SAFARI during the summer. They would, may have gone on vacation for a week or two, but they still continued to use it as we recommend around that vacation time. And their average gain on academic skills was 13 months of improvement. So their cognitive gain was exactly the same as it was for the group that used it during the school year in the study. And that was 4 years and 3 months of cognitive improvement. But it's still, even though they weren't in school over the summer, translated to improvement in academic skills in reading and in math. And if you think about using BrainWare SAFARI, as we recommend, it would typically amount to about 40 hours of use over the summer. And if you look at that little pie chart, that little tiny sliver of blue is the 40 hours of fitted into everything else over the summer. So it's pretty easy to get it in over the summer. It's a great time to build those cognitive skills for the fall. So what we're going to talk about next are what we call the 3 Ps of successful BrainWare SAFARI use. It's called planning, presenting, and purposeful coaching. The planning is pretty basic. It's the who, when, where, what, and how of your BrainWare SAFARI usage. Who is your child, presumably in this case. The when and the where, being very thoughtful about when and where they will use the program or play. And that depends a lot on where your computer is and where there's a nice space for them to be able to do it. It's really nice to have it in a regular spot that it becomes part of the routine and it's comfortable for them. Another what is what will be used to assess cognitive growth. We've talked about a couple of options that you have there. And then how is really planning your schedule. And the recommended usage for BrainWare is 3 to 5 times a week, 30 to 45 minutes for a 12 to 14 week period. You may or may not have 12 to 14 weeks over the summer, depending on when schools get out and when they're starting back up again. So, summer, excuse me. Summer seems to get shorter every year. But if you only have 8 or 10 weeks, then making sure you get 5 days a week in would be a great idea and really help you get in the usage that will have an impact of the kind that we have seen in our research that we were just talking about. So planning your schedule again, and the reason that we recommend this is because it's really what our research tells us. Our research tells us if we get this kind of usage, if you and your child get this kind of usage in the program, we would expect them to have some very significant cognitive improvements. Now let's talk about the second P for success, which is presenting. So it's probably worth giving a little thought to how you're going to introduce BrainWare SAFARI to your child. Sometimes if they're young, it's just, oh, I get to play a video game, and sort of like Cheerios, where mom likes it and the kids like it too, and everybody can feel good about it. But sometimes you may want to actually introduce the idea that our brains can change and that we can build our brains the same way we do building our bodies. So talking about what they want to do when they grow up and how these skills are going to help them, how it will help them to pay better attention, how it will help them to focus better, how it will help them if they can remember more information, keep track of where they are, follow the playbook if you're an athlete, do the music if you're a musician. And you can always use the analogy of being an athlete. It's one that that kids get and adults understand pretty readily. So I may not be able to lift 200 pounds right now, or I may not be able to run a 10-minute mile, but every time I try it, I'm going to get that much closer to being able to do it. And I'm going to build up to being able to reach that goal that I may not have thought I could do. And that's basically the same thing with your brain. You can train your brain to do things that you never thought you could do. There are a couple of books that are wonderful that really help kids understand these principles. Your Fantastic Elastic Brain is good, I think, for just about any age. There's one for adolescents that's called The Owner's Manual for Driving Your Adolescent Brain. There's a read aloud of the Fantastic Elastic Brain on YouTube. That's what that little link is on the bottom right. And again, remember that we have the handouts for you, so you have this and you can just check the slides for those links. So those are really nice ways to introduce that. And the third P is purposeful coaching. So kids will use BrainWare pretty much like they use any video game. You don't need to tell them how to do that. But there are some best practices that we call purposeful coaching. One of which is that they will get the most from the program if they move around and try all of the exercises. Everybody will have their favorites and everybody will have some that they struggle with, and that's perfectly normal. And you can let them explore for a little while, but parents and teachers both find that using what we call the 10-minute rule can be really, really helpful. And basically what that means is you work in one exercise for about 10 minutes. If you pass 2 or 3 levels quickly, you move to another exercise. If it's hard, and you're not passing a level, that's okay. Your brain is still growing. So keep it up for that 10 minutes or 7 minutes if it's a younger child, or they just can't keep it up for 10 minutes. So use your judgment on that. But working with that kind of intensity is really what is going to help make those changes in our brains. So trying to keep the number of levels completed more or less even across all the exercises. Doesn't have to be perfect, but really moving around and experiencing all of them is going to be very helpful. So I'm going to go ahead now and I'm going to share my screen. My entire screen. Oops, share. Because what I'm going to do is bring up BrainWare Safari, and we're going to just look at a couple of things. So this is what BrainWare Safari looks up when your child, when it's on your computer and they click on that link to launch it. And the first time they do, they will, or actually every time they do, they will get their place where they enter their unique username and password to log them into their program that has their information in it. And they're going to choose a Safari friend. I'm just going to go ahead and choose Jackie Jaguar today. And what happens is their Safari friend will grow up as they make progress in the program, and they get pretty excited about it very often when their character is growing up. We're going to come back and look at this progress board in a minute where it says player name, but because that's where you can tell how many levels they've passed of each of the exercises. But first what we'll do is just take a quick look out here at some of the activities. All of these highlighted areas are the exercises in BrainWare. Your kids will call them games, and that's great. That's fine. We want them to experience it as much like a game as possible. But the fact of the matter is these are serious clinical therapeutic exercises, so we usually refer to them that way. I'm just going to give you a little bit of a sense. We don't have time to go through this in detail, but you'll be able to watch it as your children do it. I'm going to start with Bear Shuffle. I'm just going to do one level. Your child will not be able to choose their level. Everybody starts at level 1. There are instructions. They can listen to them being read aloud as well as reading them. So that's good for kids who are less strong as readers or who just like auditory information. And what it would have told us if we'd actually read it is that the computer is going to give us 3 cards and turn them face up. And then it's going to turn them back over again. And our job at this first level is to get them into numeric order from smallest to largest. This is an example of how the numbers and the cards are delivered completely randomly. And so sometimes, like now, they're already in the right order and I don't need to change them around. So I'm going to just say, check my answer, and we got it right. Now, for most of the exercise in BrainWare at each level, we have to do it correctly 7 out of 10 times. And up here on the upper right is where we keep track of that. You can see the W for wins and the L for losses. So we've done it once correctly. Let's try it again. Okay, so this time they're not in the right order, 6, 5, 8, and I need to get them where the smallest is on the left. So I'm going to grab that 5 and I'm going to move it over to the beginning, and it's going to scoot that other card over, and I'm going to check my answer again. And I got it right. Now, so it told me, I was trying to encourage me to keep going because obviously I hadn't passed that level yet. But I just wanted to go ahead and give you just a little feeling for this. Now, after your student has done some of the program, they'll be able to check on the progress board. And of course, I didn't pass that level, so it's not even going to show that. But they'll get gold bars for each level that they've passed in the program. And so they can quickly look. This is a great thing for them to do when they first log in for their session, is to take a look and see which levels they passed. And then if you think about having 3 or 4 10-minute sessions during that one overall session, or segments of that overall session, what you might have them do is choose a couple of areas where they haven't passed as many, and then maybe the last 1 or 2 segments of their session time, choose the ones that they really enjoy so that there's set something to look forward for them. Okay, so that's just a quick little introduction to BrainWare SAFARI. And I'm going to get out of this, and I am going to go back. Oops, I'm going to stop sharing. All right. And then I want to get back and, oops. Oh, I know I've got a little thing hiding my slides here. Okay, so we've taken a quick look at BrainWare SAFARI. The other things that you should be aware of as you are working with your child is that they'll, of course, want to pass levels, but it's actually more important, the time they spend is more important than the levels completed. And so just emphasizing that rather than, oh, did you pass a level today, would be more important. Boy, you know, I could really tell you were working on those exercises that are really hard today, that kind of thing. So supporting and encouraging them. When the going gets tough, and it will, everybody gets to a point where it's very challenging. And sometimes you have a child that will just get really, you know, that when the going gets tough, the tough get going, and they just want to beat it, and they'll just double down and get hard. Or you may have a child that will say, oh, this is boring, or I forgot my password, or things like that. And boring doesn't actually mean boring. What it typically means when a child says that is that it's hard for them. And so having a little bit of encouragement at that point can really make a big difference. Celebrating the victories, but also thinking of some ways to encourage them. There are a few wonderful videos that I wanted to, you'll have these in the slides when you download them. But these are some videos that parents and teachers have used at the points when kids get a little discouraged. Karate Kid, you can probably imagine, also makes the point that, you know, when Daniel was doing wax on, wax off, he was really practicing those karate moves. Yoda and Luke. Yoda reminds Luke that he has to believe that he can do it in order to be able to get his X-Wing fighter out of the swamp. And the riding a bike, I will just let you discover for yourself, but I know you'll enjoy it. It's a lot of fun. In terms of tracking their progress, another helpful tool is we created a little progress chart with all of the exercises on it. And this is available behind the link that we shared with you at the beginning. So you can just print that out and use it to help your child keep track of their progress in the program. And then here's some random tips, I call them. They didn't seem to fall in a particular category, but these are things that we know have helped others as they are working in the program. There are only two ways to cheat in BrainWare. One is to have someone else do it for you. So don't let big brother or big sister sit down and play on your child's account. We want them to be able to do it. And the second thing is probably move the pencils and paper away. It's about training your memory, not about writing things down. And that's a little different from what many students are told to do in school when they can't remember things. But here we really want to work on those memory skills. So leave the pencils to the side. Parents often start seeing some changes after 5 to 7 weeks. I've heard people who say that they notice things earlier. And the changes can be subtle. They can just be, seems like they're listening a little better, or they seems like they're following directions a little bit better, or that they're focusing a little bit better. If you go on vacation and need to miss a week or two, don't stress out. Neither winter or summer, but summer is definitely not the time for that. Just pick up where you left off when you get back, and everything will be good. Okay, so make sure if you have questions and you have things that you want me to cover in specific, please don't hesitate to type it into the chat window. Next thing I wanted to do is to share some summer brain builders. And what I did here is I thought about 5 areas of cognitive processes or skills, critical thinking skills that I know are important. And then I just thought of a bunch of, and I have one question mark, so I'm going to ask for some help from all of you to think up another summer place that we might plan to do some of these activities. So the skill areas are predictions, spatial relationships, part-whole relationships, comparisons, and a growth mindset. This is not like these are all the skills that everybody will ever need for their life, but I know they're really, really important, and they can be really fun to work on. This is not supposed to be like more school. This is supposed to be just taking advantage of the activities that we're already doing in the summer to work on these skills in ways that don't seem like it. So predicting is a very important skill. Actually, our brains are constantly making predictions. Your brain right now is predicting what word I'm going to say next: helicopters. Okay, so you probably were surprised to hear me say the word helicopters, and you may even have thought you heard something else. But I did that just to make the point. When we consciously predict things about the world and think through the relationships, in this case, we're thinking about cause and effect. So if I do something, what will happen? Something will happen. And it really strengthens our understanding of those relationships. So here I paired the beach with predictions. You could do something similar for basically a car ride or a visit to the mountains or wherever. And the idea here is to do it in a way that's fun. So you can always, of course, have the discussion on the way to the beach. What do you think we will see there? Do you think the sand will be hot? Do you think there will be a lot of people? And then exploring those answers. I don't think there are going to be a lot of people. Why? Because it's Wednesday and everybody comes on the weekends or whatever. Do you think the water will be cold? Well, it wasn't cold last week, so maybe it won't be cold this week. So, but another way to do it is to make it a little bit of a game. And I call this beach bingo. And it starts with a card where you would put things that you might find at the beach. If you have young kids, you can create the card. If you have older kids, you could have them predict the kinds of things that would be at the beach and create the card themselves. This one I created from clip art from the internet. So it's nice to have the pictures if you have got little kids, of course, if they're not reading yet, but it's nice to have the words there too. Anyway, there's in a Word document and you can download it and you can use it or not use it. But I think always having something to start with is sometimes just inspires me to go ahead and try to do it. And you can, do it where you do a prize for the first one with 5 in a row, or the prize for the first one that covers everything in the board. And of course, if you live in an area that doesn't have crabs or seashells, which I put on this, you can put other pictures or other items. It's really just a starting point for your imagination and for your kids' imagination. So it helps with predicting, am I going to see these things? And then figuring out whether observing and noticing them when we do. Spatial relationships. Spatial relationships, as we talked about before, are very important in science and math. And this is an area actually where there's a really nice connection to English language arts and reading. And what I know from talking to many of the therapists and tutors that we work with is that prepositions tend to be sort of thorny. And it's, of course, one of the ways that we express spatial relationships. And many children struggle with the meaning of some of these simple words. They can't visualize them. They don't have a really strong sense of what they are. So you can, of course, create lots of games with prepositions. Oh, you could, even with a very young child, once they're, at the sort of walking around a little bit in peekaboo stage, I think, you can put your doll on the table. Now put it under the table. When kids figure out that it can be very funny to do the opposite of what you ask, then you can really have some fun with it. I think a playground, actually, I thought this paired up really well because everybody is moving around constantly and changing their relationships to the physical equipment of the playground. So it also occurred to me this morning as I was thinking that this would be a great thing to play Simon Says. So you could say, Simon says, stand on the slide. Simon says, put your foot under the slide. Simon says, stand next to the swing, that kind of thing. And you can also play with other ideas, like, I wonder what would happen if there were an elephant on the slide. Or, do you think that squirrels use the slide when we aren't looking? Or what do you think is underneath all these wood chips? Just really encouraging children to think about the world, and particularly in the context of these physical spatial relationships. So just going to the park is fun anyway, and going to the playground is fun anyway, but maybe a way to get a little bit more benefit from it. Part-whole relationships. So this has some other names, but basically everything has parts that it is made up of, and every part has subparts, and every part belongs to something larger. So when I thought about often we take our kids to the grocery store. We may go once a week or once every few weeks. We take them to the grocery store. It's good for a lot of reasons about thinking about where our food comes from and that kind of thing. But so I thought about here we might find at the store a grapefruit or an orange or any other kind of citrus fruit, and talk about what the parts are. Grapefruit has a rind and skin and juice and seeds. Even though we can't see them, we know that they're part of that. We could think about just departments within the grocery store. The meat department has a section for chicken and a section for beef and for pork with different cuts in each. So you can have a lot of fun seeing how many parts you can divide something into and what kinds of categories you can attach them to. So fruit, or yellow things, or smelly things, or sweet things. Creating categories and seeing how things fit together, how many items you can find in the store that fit that category, can help build your child's analytical capabilities and their ability to understand and organize the world. For older kids, it can still be fun, especially if you let them figure out really obscure categories, like fruits that don't, the word fruit has a U and an I in it. So we're going to look for fruits that don't have either a U or an I in them. So really get them thinking about complex combinations of things, or things that can be frozen and then thawed. Okay, so we're going to get a mess if we freeze and thaw a grapefruit, but maybe there are other items in the store that could be frozen and thawed. So again, just let your imagination go to town. All right, so now what I want to do is I want to talk about comparisons. And in order to do that, I would like to get some input from, I took some of these ideas from the comments that people submitted when they were registering, but what I'd really like to do is to get your suggestion of a place that you might be going with your kids this summer, where we can talk about the next category of cognitive brain building. So if you would somebody would just type an idea into the chat window. The zoo. Okay, I love the zoo. I'm going to go with that, Mary. Excellent. So the way I start thinking about comparisons is it always makes me think of Forrest Gump and how his mother used to tell him that life is like a box of chocolates. And in that case, it was because you're never going to know what you're going to get. But there are all other kinds of ways that you could think about life being like a box of chocolates. And in school, students are asked to compare and contrast, but usually that's not very much fun. And so we're going to talk about the zoo. So some things are similar and some things are different. Some things have many characteristics in common, some have just a few. So we can do this, of course. I think a zoo is a great place to do it. So we can talk about whether some animals are bigger than other animals, or whether they are fiercer than other animals, or think of which animals is a monkey more similar to a lion or to a cow? Now, I don't know how you think about those things, but it's a fascinating conversation. When you get them to say, okay, well, they all have tails. These monkeys do, cows do, lions do. But usually cows and lions are on 4 feet rather than on 2 feet. And often monkeys might just be on using 2 feet and climbing a tree, and cows and lions don't climb trees. So it takes you in a lot of different directions, thinking about the characteristics of things that they have in common or don't have in common. And figuring out how things are different is really what critical thinking comes down to. So anytime someone gives you an analogy like life is like a box of chocolates, well, life is like a bunch of chocolates, except that chocolates are usually sweet and life may not always be sweet. So figuring out those distinctions and those differences, these, whether it's the zoo or you could actually do this in any of the locations that we've talked about, but just keeping in mind the whole concept of similarities and differences. And I think that there's also one of the handouts also has to do with comparisons, similar and different. There's one more activity that I want to talk about. This is a great rainy day activity. And if you're somewhere that you don't have any rainy days, maybe you can pretend you have a rainy day, because this is really fun. And in this activity, I call it design your own statue. But really the idea here is that you ask your child to imagine that someday you're so famous and respected that the townspeople where you live want to build a statue in your honor. And what we want to do now is, pretend that you're one of those townspeople, but you're going to do this statue about you. And here's an example of a statue of an astronaut. But you could, they can do it for whatever they want to be. And you can use just clay or Play-Doh or sugar cubes or popsicle sticks or paper mache or whatever stuff you might have handy to let them build that. And then imagine what it would say on the plaque. It turns out that summing up your life and your accomplishments can really help kids get a vision of themselves in the future. And it turns out that having a vision of your future self is a powerful predictor of life success. And so they've done studies where they've shown that kids who can create that vision, who have some idea about what they want to be, really does benefit them in terms of the accomplishments they're able to accrue. It also tends to focus them on being a part of something bigger. So not just sort of the selfish stuff, well, I want to be, a football player, but what do I want to be remembered for is a little bit different question. When you talk about what that would say on the plaque that accompanies it, if it's a young child, you can just have them tell you what it would say, and you can write that down and you can read it back to them. Older children, of course, can write their own. And then you might, as you get to the end of that, say, okay, how would you feel if the President of the United States read that plaque when your statue is unveiled? That make you proud. Really, the thinking about the possibilities and visualizing themselves in that kind of situation can be powerful. And maybe you don't want the president, but maybe you want somebody else or somebody famous in the field that they are interested in, or something like that. Okay, so we are down to our last few minutes. I want to offer to answer any questions. Well, first of all, I want to do this, which is to give you our contact information. Karen Bucola, many of you, if you've called our customer service number, may have talked to Karen, and she's our Director of Customer Service. And we want to applaud her because her daughter just got married on Saturday. And so we wish them well and congratulate the mother of the bride. But feel free to call either of us anytime with questions. We've even had parents who've asked if their child could talk to Karen. They call her the BrainWare lady, and she's always happy to talk to them and to answer their questions as well. So we're here for you. We're here and committed to helping you have a great experience. And I will now, again, encourage anybody who has questions to type them into the chat window. Or if you can't think of them now and you have them later, you'll have our contact information. So you can let us know, and we'll be there to help. So I'll give anybody else a minute to think about what they might want to ask. Okay, so not seeing questions at this point. Karen, is there anything that I've left out or that you want to add in terms of your suggestions? Oh, Deyanira, what have you seen with regards to the cognitive assessment? Are you talking about the mind print, Deyanira? I think that's probably what you're referring to. So what we've seen is that it is really, it's a great assessment. We're just thrilled with it. And we had been looking for a long time for something that was a truly valid, nationally normed cognitive assessment that could be administered pre and post BrainWare. This one has so many additional advantages that we're just so excited about it. Because what it will do, and anybody who's interested in learning more about this, we can give you some more information and take you on a tour. So you can type in the chat window if you're interested in some more information on MindPrint. But you get a report that is so helpful in really understanding a child's strengths and weaknesses and what that means and what you're likely to see in terms of both academics and real life behaviors. And then you get basically a personalized toolbox that you can create that connects directly to that specific child. So it's not just a bunch of random recommendations and here are a bunch of nice resources. It's very specific to strategies and resources for your child and their strengths and weaknesses. In terms of its use as a pre and a post test, we are just, I've just in the last 2 weeks actually been reviewing data from some of the schools that have been using it along with BrainWare SAFARI this year, and it's very exciting. We're seeing many students with changes, improvements in cognitive skills across many different of the subtests, so attention and working memory and visual spatial processing and all those other areas. And we're seeing changes sometimes one half or even a full standard deviation, which for those of you that's, maybe going from a number of, 20 percentile points or something like that. It depends where you are in the range to begin with, how much a standard deviation is. But it's a pretty significant kinds of changes that we're seeing in students. And it's nice to have that confirmed, and it's nice also to be able to connect it to how your student's going to learn best. And these are the kinds of recommendations and resources and strategies that you can share when the fall comes with your students' teachers, with your student themselves, depending on their age and maturity. But many times it's the kinds of things that are helpful for them to learn to bolster their academic success and ability to. Yes, sharing with teachers. So, Dayanira, there's the assessment is one assessment per child. So if you can get as many assessments as you need for the number of children you're going to be testing. Mary will get you some more information. All right, so we're a couple minutes past our deadline, and during the school year, as after school program, I will be sure to do that, Mary. Okay, yes. We've done a lot of work, Mary, by the way, with students, economically disadvantaged students, and with great success. And so I'll send you a copy of a couple of studies that we've done, and be happy to talk with you some more as well. So thank you, everybody, so much for being part of this today. I hope you learned something. I hope you can take something away from it. And I hope you have a great, great summer with your kids. See you next time. Bye-bye.